happened to you and you're crying, and your mother gives you an ice cream cone to make you feel better.
Right.
Okay, here's safety, here's soothing and everything.
Right.
And if it's done often enough, you get to feel that those kind of treats and things like that, make you feel emotionally better.
Yes. Yeah.
And they do, because of the association.
Well, they appear to.
You
Because their appearance, and again, it's the linkage that creates the program. It's
Right.
the link to the emotion.
Exactly.
The subconscious mind, we all know that logically, there's no, even in childhood and certainly beyond it, we know that logically an ice cream isn't going to improve your emotional state per se.
Exactly.
But if we feel strongly enough, it does. And if it seems that every time we experience a change in emotional state, it's associated with an ice cream or a piece of cake or a piece of candy or anything that it becomes associated with, then we say ice cream equals happiness.
Well,
ice cream equals safety. Cake equals good feelings.
Right. And just if you think about that, her mother was probably saying, "Oh, it's okay, honey. It'll
Right.
be okay." Maybe hugging her.
Right.
And those are feelings of safety.
Right.
And those create feelings of safety. Now you're eating an ice cream cone. At the same time, you're having those true feelings.
Right.
And so they get linked
Right.
in the subconscious, even though an ice cream cone isn't safety.
Right.
But they get linked by those kind of events.
And again, just so to highlight, like, where's the bypass of the critical faculty in that instance? It's the heightened emotional state. Somebody feels upset about something, and there's the bypass of the critical faculty. And what's the selective thinking in that instance? Ice cream makes me feel good,
Right.
Or a sweet taste makes me feel good.
Right.
Sugar, or it makes me feel good.
Right.
So therefore, if I feel bad, the answer is sugar. And even if we know that that's not true, there's powerful messages from the body and the mind, which literally even become chemically sent to us, which you got to have it. You got to do it.
Right. And just, for someone who hasn't seen the shows and doesn't know what the definition is of that is, when we talk about bypass of the critical faculty, what we're really saying here is that there's this barrier, and we call it the critical faculty, between the conscious and the subconscious. And it can stop ideas from going into the subconscious. Well, the fact is it's kind of just a barrier. The fact is that a certain event can kind of move it aside, so messages go straight into the subconscious.
Right.
You are in a hypnotic state,
Right.
okay, when you're bypassing that. And so in that case, in the event, that barrier moves aside and the messages go into that little girl as if we, had brought her into a state of hypnosis, because she is in a state of hypnosis.
Yes, and then of course, and then coming right back to what you said earlier on, it's reinforced in societal ways, in other ways. So for example, maybe it's not an ice cream, maybe it's a fast food.
Right.
And she said, "Oh, I'll take you to a treat. I'll buy you a Happy Meal or whatever."
Right.
And then now all the images that the promoters of fast food or brands of fast food are bombarding us with through their advertising campaigns become compounded on that idea.
Right.
Because it's like, well, look, this is obvious. I feel bad, I have this, it makes me feel happy. And all these people are telling me the same thing. And they're telling me it all the time, and adults do it, and older children do it, and younger children. Well, it must be right? And so
Right.
it's compounding again and again and again, and the subconscious mind admits that in. And so people will regularly talk about things like comfort food.
Right.
Food that they find comforting, and sometimes it's things that they associate with an earlier time in their life or a particular part of their life. Very often it's just happy moments, and the advertisers are very careful to link these. I mean, after all, a happy meal.
Right, exactly.
I mean, what does that really mean, folks?
Yeah.
That the meal, a happy meal. It's what a phrase.
Well, and the problem is, if the first message is in, it's like we say, when we're less than 5 years old, that critical faculty, that barrier is not there, so everything goes straight into the subconscious.
Right.
Then it starts forming between 5 and 13, and what the critical faculty does, that barrier does, is that you get a new message comes in, and it just says, not is it right or wrong, it says, does it match what I have down in here? And if the new message that comes in from an advertiser, oh, you'll be happy, if you have this, and your mother or father told you, yeah, that's a happy event, you associated it, and they made you feel good at the time, and they gave you that meal, that critical faculty says, oh, does it match? Oh, yeah. And it opens up, and it reinforces it, it compounds it over and over again. And if you get a message like, no, that's not a good meal, that's not a healthy, it's not a happy thing, the critical faculty says, does it match what I have down in there?
Right.
No, then it doesn't let it in.
Right, and that's the difficulty, exactly, Bill, of diets, because then you've got the subconscious mind, which says, hey, this happy meal really does make me happy, and the conscious mind saying, no, it doesn't. It's not healthy, and there's no proof of that. And in that battle, that subconscious is going to win. So you can fight that battle for a period of time, and you may even appear to succeed, but if you feel bad enough, you're going to go for that thing that makes you happy, as long as that linkage is present in the mind.
Right, exactly. So that's what we're going to talk about later is how do we break these linkages and so forth. Right. But let's talk about some of these programs and some of the specifics of it, because you mentioned a couple things too. So go down through a couple of them. Counting calories. That was kind of the original. You count calories.
And it sounds perfectly logical, doesn't it? I mean,
and I've used it.
Yeah.
And I've lost weight.
Hey, calories equals energy. If you have a certain amount of energy in, you expend a certain amount of energy out. It seems to have a beautiful mathematical logic to it.
Right.
Except everybody tells us it doesn't quite work like that. I mean, the calories reflect things, and yes, they're units of measurement and of measurements of energy. We know that, but the counting calories doesn't exactly reflect physiologically in what occurs to us because of changes in metabolic rates, because of differences in people's ages, times of life, hormonal balances. There's all sorts of factors that go into it. But the basic idea behind it is that we control what our body does and what our subconscious mind regulates by measuring out and planning out what we take in. And we find a unit, and in that instance, the unit of measure becomes the calorie.
The calorie. I mean, personally, because I have my own experience with this.
Right.
I've done this before, and I always gain the weight back, right, and so forth. And there's a lot of problems with the counting calories. Number one, it on a practical basis, it takes a lot of time.
It does.
You've got to measure. You've got to weigh, and like your friend, you have to plan these meals out if you really want to do this.
Yes.
You got to add them up every day. That gets to be a real hassle. The other problem is exactly what you said is if you bring your calories low enough, now if you restrict them, your subconscious may rebel and do things because it's saying, no, I want you to keep that weight, okay? But the other thing is, even just metabolically, if you go too low, your body goes into this, it feels it's in the starvation mode,
right.
And that's when it starts lowering your metabolism.
Right.
And it'll actually increase your hunger level.
And people who promote different diets and doctors know that, for example, if you lose too much weight too quickly, and again, there are conditions where people have to lose weight very, very quickly for very specific reasons. I'm not talking about those exceptions. I'm talking about in a general sense. If you lose too much weight too quickly, there almost invariably will be a metabolic shift.
Right.
And if we think about this in really simple terms, folks, again, from the model that we talk about, I like to think of it this way. Let's say that the body sends out a message, eat, hungry, let's eat. And you, because you're following a calorie or some other measured diet in this way, say, no, don't eat, I'm telling you. Then the subconscious mind sends a stronger signal, and you ignore that signal. And then the subconscious mind says, oh my goodness, if we're sending out this message and there's no eating, there's got to be a famine.
Right.
Because why else would that be happening?
Why would you do that?
Right? There must be no food.
Right.
Oh my goodness, if there's no food, it's an emergency. Let's slow down that metabolism. And guess what? Not only when we slow down that metabolism, but we're going to look out. Anytime there's something that looks like it's got energy or energy capability, we're going to grab for it. Oh, sugar. Oh, fat. Right?
Right.
And the drives will be felt inside. They'll be even stronger. It will push them even harder because there's no alignment between the conscious and the subconscious minds. And so
Right.
all of a sudden, the subconscious just says, oh my goodness, there's a famine out there, folks. There's a famine, right?
Well, and because you think about it, I mean, human beings evolved in an environment of relative scarcity.
Right.
I mean, it's only been in recent years that unless you were the highest levels of society, then you had access to lots of food. But other than that, it was scarcity.
Yeah, and starvation was always a possibility, and certainly hunger was a possibility.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so your body was evolved to, okay, you know what? If there's extra calories around there, I'm going to store it as fat because I got to store it against the famine that might happen and so forth. And it's going to make those changes in your metabolism.
Absolutely.
If there's a starvation going on, well, let's decrease it so he doesn't use as many calories.
Right.
You know, so that, I mean, we're evolved that way, and we weren't evolved really to handle sugars and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So that's another problem.
Right.
Is you know, but if the body, if you give it to it, it's going to want to store it.
Yeah.
You know, so it really, what you're going to find is that if you restrict the calories enough, it's going to fight back.
Yes.
Your body's going to fight back. Your mind is going to fight back, and we
Right.
know that that's work as a unit.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, and you got the same thing with, we talk about Weight Watchers. Well, what's Weight Watchers, right? Well, they use a point system, so
Right.
it's not calories, but it's, you know, it's the same. It's the same thing. The big difference, I think, is, and I've known people who've done Weight Watchers. Now, disclaimer, I haven't, so I really am not an expert. But you know, it's supposed to make it easier, I think, to use certain points, and you know, they change their systems every once in a while to try to
Right.
make it easier.
Right.
And they provide some group support,
Right.
and that's good. It's helpful.
Well, Weight Watchers and similar organisations provide two things, which again is very useful if you're relying on the conscious mind, which is what I put it in two words: structure and support.
Right.
So the structure is the system that you follow, and in that instance, you know, you're following points. So you've got something. There's a goal. There's something there. And the support is the presence of other people who are on the journey with you and can report and celebrate their successes, or you know, help support them where they're failures or they slip. And again, that has to be there in that to be even have any chance of even short-term or medium-term success.
Right.
Because essentially you're doing something that's unnatural to the system.
Right.
And so you have to provide a great deal of structure, and you have to provide a great deal of support. And in those circumstances, you can experience weight loss, but it's not making a fundamental change to the system, because there's no fundamental change to the subconscious mind.
Right.
In those processes.
And one of the things, we're going to talk about the details of that and how we look at it in our program and so forth. But, you know, there are people who there's subconscious programming driving them to eat and everything. And then there can be another group of people that they're not severely overweight. And, you know, it could be just, they just, you know, they grew up in, you know, hearing Happy Meals and things like that, and maybe it wasn't so much subconscious, but just bad habits and
Yes.
so forth. And those kind of people can be helped by those programs because they're not fighting the subconscious on it.
Not to the same degree, no.
Right. You know, it may be mild, but, you know, maybe that's okay. So they do have success, but the problem, you know, that I've seen some of the figures from Weight Watchers, they're very successful at losing weight. The problem is X percentage, and a rather large percentage, gain weight again.
Right.
Now, you know, so there's a lot of good to them, but, you know, there's always the certain shortfalls to a lot of these. Now, the other ones are, you know, like Nutrisystems and Jenny Craig and so forth. And so these are prepackaged foods. And if you look at it, counting calories and weighing everything, okay, like I said, practically, that's a lot of time,
Right.
okay? And it's painful to do and so forth. And, you know, if you can make it with points, Weight Watchers, maybe it's easier. Well, the Jenny Craigs and the Nutrisystems try to make it even easier by prepackaged meals.
Right.
So they arrive at your house. You don't have to count them. You have to weigh them.
So somebody else's conscious mind is telling you what to eat, right?
Exactly. and they you know, get proportions, and they change the proportions of calories in them. I actually went on their website. I think it was Jenny Craig, one or the other of those two, or Nutrisystems, and they showed a Dunkin' Donuts muffin, and I think it showed 400 calories or more, and a Jenny Craig or a Nutrisystem, and it was like 170.
Yeah.
So you're getting a blueberry muffin, but it's being made with a lot less calories, which
Yeah.
is not a bad thing. It's good, but again,
Maybe.
you're not addressing the subconscious issues there either. You know, again, they've got other good components. I think it was Jenny Craig. They assign you a counselor, an advisor, and you're supposed to touch base once a week with this person. So again, Weight Watchers, you get the, you know, group support
Right.
and so forth, and I think you can talk to an individual.
Sure.
And again, the Jenny Craigs provide that, and I think Nutrisystem might do something similar.
Yeah, and it's, again, the same comes back to the same thing, in my mind at least: structure and support.
Right.
You know, you create a structure, you create something for the mind to follow, and you create a support system in that for that to happen. And in that way, you hope to create sustainability, long-term success.
Right.
But it's a struggle, folks. And again, what you're here is saying is that that's really not the way it's supposed to be. what you're going to discover is your body and mind working together have a self-regulatory mechanism.
Right.
And our issues with a lot of these is that these processes ignore it and turn it off and
Right.
make it more and more difficult to access it.
Right.
Right.
And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is what happens with diets is people lose connection with their natural signals in their body that say, okay, stop eating now.
Right.
You've had enough.
Or start eating now.
Or start eating now, right?
Right,
And they they eat on a schedule, or they eat this and that, and that's one of the real issues, because you really need to be connected to those signals.
Yes.
Even if when we talk about our program, if you talk about traumas that are driving it from early ages and so forth, yeah, okay. Even if you take care of those, you still need to reconnect them to those
Absolutely.
feelings,
Yeah,
and so forth. So, so another one that there's out there, is I looked up, is the 5-2 fast diet.
Yeah. Which I actually, there was a part in my career where I would recommend that. We were going to talk about different approaches, and I like this because basically it's well researched. It's out there. You can find it. But the basic idea is that on 2 days, or sometimes 3, but mostly 2 days, in a 7-day period, you greatly restrict your caloric intake down, and you do that for spread through 2 meals during the day. Slightly different caloric intake for women and men, but that's essentially the idea. And then outside of that, you can literally eat anything you want to eat.
Right.
And again, in fairness to the people that promote this is well researched. There's scientific evidence of a lot of benefits from this type of, and it's called a fast diet, not because it's quick, but because they're fasting.
Right, you're fasting, and
yes.
And then what I've read online was a man would be allowed 600 calories and a woman 500 calories.
Was it that little?
Yeah, it was that little. I know there was some discrepancy because you looked it up and you saw something like 1,000.
Yeah.
And maybe this is wrong. Who knows? Because
but it's certainly very low. Yeah, it's very low.
Yeah.
And there are various forms of it. There are ones where people go on an even more severe diet, but they only do it twice a month. There's various forms of it, but this was one formulation which was practical, and it had many practical elements to it. But once again, it's forcing a structure upon you and completely overriding it. Now, again, is there any health benefit to fasting? There may well be for some people, perhaps many of us at certain times.
Right.
Are we saying never fast again or never do these things? No. We're just saying that we're talking about whether one wants to make this the structure for one's whole life. Because what we're talking about when we're talking about diet and even weight loss, we're talking about one's relationship to food and drink through one's whole life.
Right.
What that means from a young person until you draw the last breath on this earth.
Right.
How one is related to food. And so is it practical? Is it enjoyable? Is it, and even beyond all of those questions, does it align with the mechanisms that nature provides all of us with, regardless of our age, culture, gender, or anything.
Right. Right. I mean, that's the basic thing is to get people to align with the natural systems in the body, that will bring them to a healthy weight, and so because you've got other ones like the Atkins diet, which a lot of people were against for a long time because it had high proteins and low carbs and
high fats.
High fats, and that's what they were concerned about, is the high fats and so forth. And
again, Dr. Atkins and similar followers, they had very good reasons. Poor Dr. Atkins, I always feel, has been somewhat, I don't think Dr. Atkins, when he was alive and in any of his writings, says that the sort of high fat, high protein, very, very low carbohydrates diets is something you should adopt all of your life for all times. But it's there to produce a ketogenic effect, to rev up the systems to begin a process of weight loss. And again, there's physiological, there's good reasoning behind it, good medical reasoning. I mean, he was a cardiologist, and one respects his opinion. But again, does it align with what's in us? And is it sustainable through the whole of one's life? Is that how one wants to lead one's life?
I think the one thing I find with a lot of these, there's always a component that actually is good.
Oh yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
in these different methods and,
Right.
and so forth. And with Atkins, staying away from refined sugars,
Right.
carbohydrates, that's not a bad thing.
Absolutely not.
Doesn't
no.
mean you have to cut them out completely, but should we be having a lot of those? Well, no.
And even Dr. Atkins, didn't recommend staying on a quote Atkins diet in that way all of your life.
Right.
It was a stage. It was a part.
Right.
And for others,
Now, are you familiar with the paleo diet? I know you mentioned to me.
Well, I mean, the paleo diet, folks. For those of you that have diets, this is the diet based upon apparently what we were eating when we were cavemen. I guess before the agrarian revolution and things like that, which is even before my time and Bill's time, but just a little bit. But and the idea being that our physiologically we haven't moved a lot beyond that, and therefore if we stick to the diet that people supposedly stuck to in paleological times, that this would be healthier for us. And so it tends to be high fat, high carbs. Low carbs, lots of meats, lots of proteins. Again, certain restrictions on fruits and certain vegetables which are determined to be high in the glycemic scale, and so there are various forms of the paleo diet.
Right.
Again, one can see merits in our society in which we overconsume refined foods, we overconsume certain, complex carbohydrates and
Right.
all forms of carbohydrates. It's understandable. Again, I'm not sure it completely aligns with the way our bodies and minds work together.
Right.
And again, if it's being used simply as another construct put on top of those mechanisms, it's going to have difficulties and it's
Right.
going to have flaws.
It's kind of funny because if I look back at what I've heard for the last 20, 25 years, it's kind of shifted.
Oh, yeah.
And again, there's components of everything. For the longest time, it was fats make you fat, and then they Atkins and so forth comes along, and it's like, no, fats don't make you fat. Now carbohydrates make you fat, right, and so forth. And I think there's some truth to some of these things
And
if you overeat the carbohydrates, they'll make you fat.
And the old food pyramids, the food pyramid which at the base of that pyramid was the carbohydrates and grains and breads and cereals and things like that, and rices and pulses, and we can talk a lot about some of the politics behind that, but what we're really talking about is, once again, is this construct, this structure laid on top of it, which seems to vary through time and research, and is that what we should be following?
Right, exactly. I know. And then it was funny because then they came up with all these no-fat foods or low-fat foods,
Right.
Snackwells, this and that, and so forth. And people got the impression that you could have as many of those as you wanted because they're low-fat.
Right. Or the other
For the
side of
longest
it
time.
is that our lives should all be based upon extremely low levels of fats, all of it, all the time, even our children.
Right.
The cholesterol, which is almost like a word of evil, but of course in children, very young children, it's absolutely essential. It's the
Right.
essential building block of the
Right.
brain. Low cholesterol is very, very, very unhealthy for children. That's not
Right.
me saying that. That's a medical fact. They need it to build their brains.
Right.
So low fat things for very young children, that's not healthy for them.
Right.
It might be debatable later on, but so we again, it's a construct that we're talking about.
Right. So I mean, there's just been so much back and forth about a lot of these different things. Eggs were evil for a while, like you say, and then eggs were
evil for a
okay,
while, and then they come back. And
and so forth. And what we're going to explain to the audience is that in the process we use, it's really to use it more the natural abilities of your body and tendencies of your bodies and so forth, and it's not to get necessarily extreme about any one of those things.
Right. I mean, basically, what you're going to hear, folks, more in the next show as we talk about specifically what we work on in detail, is that following the processes that we recommend, you're never going to have to use diets again.
Right. Right.
Now, again, as we talked about, there are exceptions. If you're out there and you're a diabetic, or you have some other very, very particular dietary concern, because maybe you've had an operation or you've had a transplant, of course there are differences, but I'm talking about generally. following the processes that we recommend, you won't have to diet. And that may sound really, really surprising to you. It may sound radical and crazy even, but we're going to describe, you know, in the course of time, how that is.
And what that is.
And it's available to everybody. So.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, there's another, one of the other ones is the set point theory that came out quite a while ago. And basically it says, you know, while our bodies have a certain set point, a weight you gravitate towards and so forth. And so the way that you would, so a lot of people at the time said, oh, I'm overweight, and it's my set point. I can't change that, right?
There it is.
And so forth.
Right.
It was
sort of a determinism,
right?
right?
Right.
That's me. That's my fate.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so forth. And I will say that I found my weight going back to a certain point, but I think it's more habit-wise.
And subconscious programming.
Yeah, and things like that. But what they did find, you know, they did some research on it. What they did find is you could change the set point. Mm-hmm. You'd have to restrict your food so that you got your weight down. And even in that, they found if you didn't hold it long enough, your body would change your metabolism and your eating hunger level, and to push you back to that higher weight. But if you held it there long enough, it would finally, you know, reset your set point to that.
Right.
But again, that's a deprivation thing, and
absolutely,
it's hard, it's long, and so forth. And then, you know, the other ones is, you know, you can go to real extremes. Gastric surgery,
right?
You know, gastric band surgery, gastric bypasses,
right,
which are generally only used, you know, for extreme cases, 100 pounds or more. Partly because you know the insurance won't pay for it, unless it's, you know, an extreme case and morbidly obese and so forth. And then you have medications, and you've got some things there that are, you know, well researched by pharmaceutical companies, okay, and you know, pharmaceutical companies are required to test for safety, not just efficacy. But then you've got a lot of these other things that are on the market that, as long as they don't claim they cure a disease, they can promote them as much as they want. Right. And they're not approved by the FDA and so forth. And some of them had things, you know, like amphetamine-like substances in them. Right. And so taking those kind of things isn't necessarily a good thing.
Right, so we've got mechanical means in the forms of different forms of surgery. We've got chemical means.
Right.
We've got conscious mind means. We've even got liposuction. I mean, something really physical. You just pull the fat right out. Right. I mean, it's.
But if you think about the liposuction, we're getting down to the end of our show here, and which is good. We've got a whole other section where we're going to give the good news.
Yes, right.
Right. Is the fact is that if you think about liposuction, it's so funny. If you haven't changed any of your eating habits, if you haven't changed anything else, you're going to pull it out. Well, you're going to regain it.
Probably.
I mean, it's just logically, you say, yeah. I mean, if you did it because of you know, to reshape your body, maybe it's different. But unless you change something else.
So what we're going to show you folks on the next show is the part is how you make those changes.
Right.
How you can recruit the power of your subconscious mind to help you attain a healthy weight, and to sustain that through the whole of your life without the burden of diets or all the other things that we've been talking about here.
Right.
And how it's available really to anybody. How it's in you right now. Right. And so we said it was a big topic, didn't we?
Yeah, it is. But
it's frighteningly large.
And we had to talk about all the other things out there.
Right.
You know.
So watch us next time.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll give you good news.
So until that time, and I don't know, Bill, what about those 20 pounds? Do you think some of that will be coming off?
Well, I don't know. We'll have to try it, you know. See if I can get rid of it.
So until that period of time, folks, thank you very much for watching this edition of Hypnosis Helps with myself, Neil Myers, and my colleague Bill Miller, and we look forward to picking up this topic next time. Thanks.